So in the decade and change that I've been doing this, I find that I'm more apt to start taking bricks and bats to shows that are awful than I am to start pinning medals on shows that are good. Well, that's kind of how it goes. There's a lot of anime out there, after all, and a lot of them are kind of hot garbage. Combine this with my utter lack of interest in currently airing anime and the way it gets completely forgotten roughly 2 weeks after it finishes airing, and it's kind of hard to get a read on what I actually do like in my anime. But then I came to a slightly disconcerting realization. I can tell you my favorite minutia for anything you might want, but ask me what my favorites are in broad strokes, and you can get a 1,000-yard stare in response. Now, there's probably a very long and peculiar explanation for all this, but that's between me and my therapist. The most salient reason for this is that I'm cursed with the ability to readily categorize things within narrow parameters, but beyond that, I'm a little lost sea otter pup. And the things that I would highly recommend are actually quite different from the shows that I would consider my top whatevers. So that's a different video altogether. So I guess this is a show about what 2020 Prof likes, for all the things that may include. Now, don't take this as gospel from me either, because I could easily change my mind after this thing goes live. I have enough trouble keeping my brain straight in the first place, so wrangling a list of favorites this broad is kind of a massive pain. So, as opposed to shows that I recommend as good examples of their genres as a whole, this is for shows that I like personally without much recourse to if they're super fancy schmancy artistic shows or not. Anyway, less ado-ing, more listing. Lupin III. A good way to kill a couple hours is to just watch this goofball heist show and appreciate the minuscule amounts of fucks given across the course of the series. Taken, however, as a whole, the amount of different characterizations available solidified this as something that perks up my ears every time more gets announced. The adventures of Lupin III and his gang of miscreants can effortlessly switch from screwball globetrotting to sincere character examinations without changing really much anything about the characters' designs or motivations. Between the original series in the 70s and the revival OVA and TV series of the last decade, the depth of character is just so rich and detailed that there's a Lupin for everyone. If the TV series doesn't get your attention, try one of the movies or OVAs or vice versa. You can find a Lupin to call your own, even if it's just Castle of Cagliostro. The franchise has so much to dive into, no matter what mood you're in, so don't sleep on it. Sergeant Frog. What do you get when you cross Char Aznable and Kermit the Frog? Well, other than me, I guess. Yes, Sergeant Frog, or Kero Gunso, depending on your geographical location, is a character that resonates with me personally. Keroro is a guy who got way off track from what he was doing, lured by the siren song of Gundam and model building, and at this point there's really no course correction. So you can imagine how that sort of hardcore otaku shit really hits me. Considering all the references they make to anime from the 70s through the 90s, it's like catnip to me. I remember they had a preview episode showing at ASEN in 2010, and I was pitched over laughing at the episode they showed because I was just getting every single reference without even blinking. Yeah, just pump it into my veins. Gimme, gimme, gimme.
Cow flash, victory vigor.
Gundam Build Fighters / Angelic Layer. So this is a weird one for me because I remember way back in the day when I was first starting out, I thought it was weird that Angelic Layer as a game had so few dudes playing it, when I, as a Warhammer 40k player, was all over it. And of course, Angelic Layer is a great show in itself, with beautiful music and characterization to go along with surprisingly vicious combat for dolls. The show as a whole immediately resonated with me as a miniature wargamer, and for the longest time, that was all I really had to scratch that itch. And then Build Fighters happened, and there are really few times in one's life when a piece of media feels laser-targeted at your interests. I've had it happen to me about 4 times in my life, and Gundam Build Fighters was one of those times. And again, just like Sergeant Frog, I was like, I know this system. For every nod and in-joke in the original Gundam Build Fighters and its subsequent series were in the same boat. It's my babby, and I love most of it. Gun Sword, Gun X Sword, Gun Cross Sword, Gun something X something. I really enjoyed Trigun when I was watching it in the early 2000s, but being me, I did think to myself, what if this had robots in it? And lo and behold, 2005 rolls around and boom, Gun Cross Sword, the show that dares to be Trigun with robots. Now, to be fair, this show is one that I actually dearly love. It borrows aesthetically from Trigun initially, but definitely gets more of its own vibe by the end. It's also a show that primarily features a guy who is sick to fucking death of half the other characters in the show, and that is an energy that I feel in my little black heart. It also has Carmen 99, who is the criminally underloved lady character, and ticks a bunch of boxes on my fine-ass woman list. I'm a man who knows what he likes, thank you. But the show also has some of the best pacing of its time, which is something you don't realize unless you don't got it. And finally, it combines super and real robots in a way that feels natural and not shoved in. The robots feel heavy and mechanical, and they're animated in a way that really zeroes in on that. Underrated, underrepresented, go watch it now. Gundam Wing. I love Gundam as a franchise, even though it's had its ups and downs, but you never forget your first one. And this one is specifically near and dear to my heart because it hit me just at the right time in my life. Suffice to say, without the obsessive collecting that I did for Gundam Wing on VHS, it was 1999 after all, I'd never have gotten to the point where y'all are watching me talk about cartoons on the internet. This is either a very good thing or a very bad thing, depending on who you are. But its debating of pacifism was very important to me, starting to feel out my political beliefs too, especially when a bunch of people I knew were cementing themselves as hardcore conservatives and warhawks in the wake of 9/11. Gundam Wing also holds up to this day very well, and I made a video about why, so go watch that for more. Scrap Princess. I like a good high fantasy show, but Scrap Princess plays with a lot of genre conventions in new and interesting ways, at least for the time. Couple this with a simple but understated design sensibility and a really solid dynamic between the main characters, and you've got a recipe for prof bait. Scrap Princess was a series that relied on the audience to be genre savvy to follow along until the twist came, and then used it to pivot into the endgame with a smoothness and skill not often seen. And anything else I say about it from this point on is probably a spoiler, so go check it out. Slayers. Well, if you haven't noticed by now, I like franchises that can really effectively combine levity and high stakes action, like Lupin and Patlabor, and of course Slayers. The continuing adventures of Lena Inverse, Sorceress Supreme, and either her band of ruffians or her definitely not wife Naga the Serpent are all cut from the same cloth, and you know roughly what kind of madness you're getting into whenever you turn it on. Blending that solid art style with comedy and action in a way that doesn't really seem to happen as much as it used to, Slayers is a perfect encapsulation of everything that I really dig in anime that isn't mechanical and giant. I've often joked that Lena Inverse is a character that wouldn't be made nowadays, and I still think it's true. Now, when are we getting the next season? Come on, they started making books again. Magic Knight Rayearth / Escaflowne. I like shows that try and fuse two genres together, in this case either magical girls and mecha or high fantasy and mecha. And to do it from a predominantly female perspective is a welcome change from more male-oriented writing teams. Again, strong character designs can float a lot of weight with me, and the emotional core of both stories is so robust that it really paves over any deficiencies that might have been a deal breaker for lesser shows. Story is key, characters are king. The characters in both shows react naturally to their isekai situations and the world they've been thrust into feel lived and real, for lack of a better term, not fresh and unbroken. For all the beauty in both Rayearth and Escaflowne, the danger feels real and present, and the emotional beats are equally as real. And finally, the most what the fuck entry on this list is a personal favorite from a long time ago. Super Gals is a story about 3 high school age girls who are part of what are called the Co-Gals, a subculture that still pops up in anime now and then. Co-Gals are kind of like Valley Girls from the 90s or Scene Kids from the 2000s, I guess, and are frequently a target of ridicule for being fashion obsessed and perceived as easy and shallow, or in worse cases, a step away from being prostitutes. However, Ron comes from a police family, Miyu is an ex-gang member, and Aya comes from a super strict family, so they're not really the most likely candidates for hoeing around. The show tackles class divides, growing up, sexuality, taking care of communities, and just how to be a good human being all around, and what are some of the things to be on the lookout for, all while wrapping it up with a really snazzy art style, and of course, getting that comedy beat in there. It's great. Stop judging me. At any rate, there's all that, and some of them have been combined because I don't want to really repeat myself all that much. There's also a list of real robot mecha shows that you can use as its own sort of guideline for shows that I like. I think this really cuts to the heart of what I prefer to see in an anime and what I don't feel like I get to see a lot. At the end of the day, these are all shows worth thinking about, watching, and talking about, and if I can spark any of you to do such a thing, then I feel like I have done my job. That being said, this is Professor Otaku, the greatest American anime critic, signing off.